Welcome to the abyss. Welcome to the place where silence reigns louder than screams and shadows speak more truth than light ever could. You're here now, standing on the edge of something irreversible. You didn't cry out, you didn't flinch, you didn't warn them, and yet they walked straight into it, smiling, like sheep to a slaughter, like fools who laughed at the storm until the storm opened its eyes and whispered their names. This is your reckoning. This is your moment. Not because you chased them, not because you screamed, not because you lifted a single finger, but because you didn't. You stood still. You did nothing. And that was everything. Before we spiral deeper into this madness, before we tear through flesh and myth and memory, stop for a breath. If you're still with me, if this voice is crawling into your bones, into that dark corner of you that knows exactly what I'm talking about, then let it in, let it consume you. And if, and only if, this feels like something you've lived through, something you've survived, or maybe something you're about to become, then don't just listen, subscribe. Hit that bell like it's a war drum. Smash the like you're breaking chains off your soul, and stay close. Because what we're about to unfold isn't just a speech, it's a scar being ripped open. And I want you right here for every damn second of it. They never saw it coming, and the truth is, they never wanted to, because warning signs are boring to the ignorant. Warnings are inconvenient to the arrogant. You spoke with your silence, and they laughed at it. They mocked your quiet. They mistook your stillness for fear. But you weren't afraid. You were watching, calculating. You let them think they were winning. You let them climb higher, smile wider. You watched them dance above the very pit they dug for you, and all the while, you said nothing. Not because you couldn't, but because you didn't need to. Some people don't deserve a warning. Some people need to learn the price of presumption the hard way. You didn't push them. You didn't trick them. You simply stood still, and the trap they built closed in around them. There's a strange kind of power in silence, the kind that unnerves, the kind that makes enemies glance over their shoulder, even when you're nowhere near. They underestimated the quiet one. They underestimated you because you weren't loud, because you didn't retaliate right away, because you didn't waste your breath on explanations or excuses or pleas. They thought you were weak. That was their mistake. That was the thread they pulled, unraveling everything they thought they knew. Silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's patience. It's poison that works slowly, and by the time they taste it, it's already inside their blood. They laughed, they smiled, they invited themselves into the fire, thinking it was a throne. They called you harmless, they called you broken. They celebrated in advance, toasted to your failure, wrote your ending without knowing you were the author of every page. They forgot that some of the most dangerous people are not the ones who fight back, but the ones who wait. And you waited, long enough to know that no revenge tastes better than the one that serves itself. They walked straight into it. You didn't lay a trap, they built it. You just waited for the door to close. There are moments in life where vengeance doesn't need blood, or screams, or chaos. It just needs truth. Cold, undeniable, irreversible truth. And that's what this was. Truth sharpened like glass. Truth wrapped in silence. They stumbled into it thinking they were gods, thinking they were the storm, only to find themselves drowning in a flood of their own making. You didn't scream when they tried to bury you. You didn't beg when they turned their backs. You smiled. You sat in the dirt and you waited. Because you knew. You knew they were running in circles. You knew their momentum was only carrying them faster toward the edge. You watched them build the fire, and when it burned, they were the ones standing in the middle. Don't waste time explaining yourself to people who have already decided you're the villain. Let them. Let them tell their version. Let them believe what they need to sleep at night. You're not here to argue. You're not here to convince. You're here to exist, to endure, to outlive the lies. And while they spend their breath crafting false truths, yours remains unshaken, silent but unshaken. You owe no one an explanation for your silence. Sometimes the loudest justice is watching the ones who wronged you choke on their own narrative. They underestimated the pain you were holding. They thought it was a weakness. But that pain was fuel. You carried it, not like a burden, but like a weapon. Hidden, controlled, waiting. And when the time came, you didn't even need to swing it. Because pain, when left unspoken, becomes prophecy. And your prophecy unfolded with brutal precision. They fell into it, walked into it, smiled into it, thinking it was their victory march. But it was their curtain call. And you just stood there, still, watching. Remember this, when people try to destroy you, when they laugh in your face, when they tear at your foundations, don't always fight back. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive. Let them think you're gone. Let them think they won. And then wait. Because time has a cruel way of unmasking everything. And when it does, when the trap finally snaps shut, you won't have to say a word. The silence will scream for you. They never respected your kindness. They never saw your grace. They took your patience as permission, your silence as surrender, your restraint as fear. But what they didn't know is that some of the most savage storms don't make a sound until they hit. You were of that storm. And when it came, it didn't roar, it didn't thunder, it simply took. Everything, swift, brutal, beautiful. And you just stood still as the ashes rained down. Let this be a reminder. You don't have to burn bridges. You don't have to slam doors. Sometimes, all you have to do is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Let them dig their hole. Let them build their throne of lies. Let them climb. And when they fall, because they always do, don't catch them. Don't say a word. Just watch. Because you didn't need to win the argument. You didn't need to get the last word. You were the last word. Now they're gone. Drowned in the very flood they created. Lost in the labyrinth they swore would trap you. And all that remains is the echo of their laughter, fading into the void. They walked into the trap smiling. And you just watched. You did nothing. And that is what made you powerful. You see, monsters don't always have claws. Sometimes they have patience. Sometimes they look like you. Calm, collected, controlled. And that's what scared them most. That you never broke. That you never needed to become loud or cruel or desperate. You were the eye of the storm, and they mistook you for peace. Until it was too late. So, here's the truth. The world will always underestimate the silent ones, the resilient ones, the ones who don't seek revenge, but simply wait for the world to turn. And when it does, when the liars fall, when the masks crack, when the castles built from ego crumble, the only one left standing will be the one who said nothing, did nothing, moved nothing, just waited. And now you've arrived. Not because you fought harder, Not because you played their game, but because you refused to play it. You chose stillness. You chose observation. And in the end, your silence became the sword they never saw coming. They walked into the trap smiling, and you just smiled back. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been torn down by people who claimed they loved you, if you've ever watched the world spin without you and had to claw your way back with no applause, then hear me now. You are not weak. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. You are the storm waiting to break. You are the quiet before the reckoning. You are the hand that never struck, but held the power to end it all. Let this speech echo in your chest. Let it become a warning, not to others, but to your doubt, to your hesitation, to that voice inside you that still wonders if you're enough. You are, and the proof is this. They walked into the trap you never built, and you watched it close, without ever lifting a hand. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new silence, a new stillness, one not born of pain, but of purpose. So stay sharp, stay patient, and when they come again, and they always do, let them smile, let them laugh, let them walk in, and once again, do nothing. Because you are the trap now, you are the silence that ends the storm, and they're just another echo waiting to fade. Absolutely. Let's continue this descent. The story doesn't end at the trap, it begins with it. Because after the silence wins, after the dust settles, after they vanish into the consequences of their own design, you're left with something far more dangerous than revenge: clarity. You finally see it, the patterns, the roles they played, the lies they whispered to themselves to justify tearing you down. And in that moment, you realize it was never personal. It was never about you. They weren't trying to destroy you. They were running from themselves. You were just the mirror. The threat wasn't your power. It was your existence. Because you stood for something they could never become. And that scared them to death. So they tried to break you. They tried to redefine you. They built stories. They threw shadows at you, hoping the world would mistake you for the monster they were afraid of. And when you didn't defend yourself, when you let them shout, let them twist the narrative, let them scream into the void without giving them the dignity of a reply, that's when the fear really sank in. Because deep down, they knew the one who doesn't speak is the one you should be afraid of. And now you stand alone, but not lonely, strong, but not hardened. You've earned your silence. You've crafted it like armor, because you know. You've walked through fire, but you carry no burn marks. You've drowned in betrayal, but you didn't swallow it. And that right there is the kind of strength they will never understand, the kind that builds without sound, the kind that destroys without violence. You want to know something cruel? They thought they won, even when they fell into the trap, even as it closed around them. They thought it was a mistake, a coincidence. They'll blame the world, fate, bad luck, anything but themselves. They'll rewrite the ending again. They'll convince themselves you were lucky, that you just happened to land on your feet, because admitting you were right, admitting your silence was wisdom, that would mean facing the truth. You were never weak. You were always just waiting. So let them cling to their stories. Let them point fingers at shadows while they disappear into them. You have no time for that. You have empires to build now, quietly, with stone, not noise, with purpose, not panic, You've leveled up in silence, and now you speak only in actions. You don't argue. You don't explain. You move, and the world watches. Because here's the real twist. You didn't win by outsmarting them. You didn't win by trapping them. You won by letting them reveal themselves. You watched, and when the time came, you didn't retaliate. You just let go. You let gravity, karma, fate, whatever you want to call it, do its job. That's power. That's the kind of power that doesn't show up in screams or fire or war. It shows up in the eyes, in the calm, in the final, deadly silence. They walked into the trap smiling, not because you baited them, but because they needed to. They needed to believe in their own lie, needed to believe they had won, needed to believe they were above consequence. And in their arrogance, they walked forward, blind, loud, proud, right into the jaws. You didn't smile. You didn't flinch. You didn't say, "I told you so." You just stood there, watching the storm collapse inward, watching everything they built on your name, your pain, your patience, turn to ash. And in that silence, you said everything. You said, "You never understood me." You said, "You took my silence for submission." You said, "Now sit in the chaos you created." But you didn't have to speak it. They heard it. In every crashing failure, in every loss they couldn't blame on you anymore, in every reflection they now have to stare at without distortion. You weren't their enemy. You were the mirror. And no one hates anything more than seeing the truth of themselves, naked, in the reflection they tried to shatter. Now what? That's what you're wondering, right? What comes after the silence, after the trap, after the fall? You build, you rise, you forge. And this time, you don't ask for permission. You don't lower your voice. You don't explain your choices. You don't warn anyone. Because now, you know what you're capable of. You know that the best revenge isn't a fight. It's elevation. It's disappearing from the battlefield and showing up at the throne. It's becoming so untouchable that even your name becomes a myth they whisper about in fear. You don't even need them to fall anymore, because now that you're awake, you don't care if they rise or burn. You're done reacting. You become. That is the legacy of silence. That is the echo of restraint. That is the aftermath of patience turned predator. They walked into the trap smiling, and you smiled too, but not because you were cruel, not because you wanted them to suffer, but because finally, the noise ended, and the truth spoke. Not in screams, not in violence, not in vengeance, but in silence, in stillness, in the echo of your still, watching in eyes. They walked straight into it, and you did nothing. And now, they're gone. Let this be a warning to the next ones. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them think you've gone quiet. And then, just wait. Because the storm doesn't shout. It doesn't warn. It doesn't fight fair. It just comes. And when it does, it wears your face and smiles. Because this isn't just a moment. This isn't just about them walking into the trap. This is about you, the one they never saw coming, the one who learned to sharpen pain into precision, the one who turned heartbreak into armor, the one who mastered the art of not reacting, not explaining, not stooping to their level, but rising in silence. Because now, in this aftermath, in the wreckage of their arrogance, you remain. And their echoes, faded, forgotten, or worse, remembered only or their collapse. They were loud, weren't they? Always needing to be seen, always needing to be heard, always convincing the world that you were the threat, that you were the one to be watched. But now that the dust is cleared, now that the storm has passed, all that's left is the truth. And the truth doesn't care how loud they screamed. The truth stands still. Like you did. And that's the kind of revenge they never recover from. Because it's one thing to lose a fight. It's another thing entirely to realize there was never a fight to begin with. Just a silent reckoning they walked into while believing they were the ones in control. That's what kills them slowly. Not the fall, but the fact that they fell into nothing, and that nothing was you. The stillness, the absence, the patience. You never needed to raise a hand. You never needed to twist a knife. You just let them keep running until they ran out of road, and right off the edge they swore you'd fall from. And now you've changed. Because you saw what happens when you stop chasing. When you stop defending yourself, when you stop explaining your heart to people who only wanted to twist it. You became dangerous, not in rage, but in silence. And that's the kind of danger the world can't predict. You see, they thought they could measure you by your words, by your reactions, by how much you cared. But they never once thought to measure your stillness. They never once stopped to think, what happens when you don't respond? What happens when the person who's been patient stops speaking entirely? What happens when the one you thought was broken stops bleeding? They happen into it, they walk into it, and the door locks behind them, not because you trapped them, but because they were never free to begin with, bound by their own ego, chained to their own illusions, prisoners of their own lies. You just let them walk in. You didn't even watch them fall, not out of cruelty, but because you were already gone to build something better, stronger, quieter, somewhere they'll never find you again, not because you're hiding, but because you've risen so far above, they'll never reach you. And now, you don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't even need closure. You are the closure. You are the ending of the story they wrote without your permission. You are the silence after the scream, the calm after the war, the breath that no one hears, but everyone feels. They'll say you changed. They'll say you became cold, unreachable, distant. Let them. They don't realize that silence is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of discipline. It's the proof that you no longer need to explain the fire inside you to people who only ever came to pour water on it. They wanted to be the storm. They wanted to be the chaos. They wanted to be the villain in your story, believing it made them powerful. But the truth is this: you don't fight storms. You survive them. You outlive them. You become the sky after. The silence that follows. The world doesn't remember the storm. It remembers what stood after the storm passed. And that's you. So let them talk. Let them walk. Let them fall. Let them smile their way right into the jaws of what they made. You did nothing. And that nothing will echo forever. Because stillness is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And the absence of noise is sometimes the loudest answer. They don't forget the one who didn't scream. They forget the ones who had to. You never needed noise. You became the echo. And from now on, every time someone underestimates you, every time they mistake your silence for softness, every time they think you're nothing but calm waters, let them. Because deep beneath the surface is something they'll never survive. Something ancient, something quiet, something that watches and waits. Like you did. They walked straight into it, and you never said a word, because you didn't have to. And now they know. They know exactly what kind of silence you are. The kind that ends things. The kind that doesn't blink. The kind that lets them walk smiling into their own destruction, while you just breathe, just exist, just wait. They did this. They created their fate. And you simply stood still. You did nothing. And somehow, that was everything. And now it's done. The noise is gone. The dust has settled. And all that's left is the quiet. Your quiet. They walked into the trap smiling, never knowing that your silence was the sharpest blade of all. You never raised your voice, never struck back, never played their game. And still, you won. Because sometimes, the greatest power lies not in destruction, but in discipline. Not in rage, but in restraint. And as they vanish into the consequences they built with their own hands, you remain. Unbothered, undefeated, and unchanged. You did nothing.